Welcome to the Geek Soup podcast, a twice-weekly show where we talk about all things pop culture to tickle your nerd bone. No matter where you're coming from, no matter who you are or who or what you identify as long as you don't identify as a serial killer or Lord Voldemort, you are welcome here. This is a safe space for you. Welcome to the soup. Welcome to another episode of the Geek Soup. I have been a little MIA lately, and you can probably tell why. I don't have COVID. I just had a wee little head cold, and it really derailed me the past couple weeks. I will try my best to edit out the sniffles, but if I miss any, I apologize in advance. But I'm really excited to get back into it. I love October, and Halloween is definitely my favorite non-holiday holiday and of course time of year. And where I am, we were getting a nice elongated autumn, except then we got snow, so there's that. But I feel like it's, one positive. We still got an amazing autumn, and there's one positive to come out of this hellhole of a year. So, in honor of my favorite time of year, I've asked you guys, my listeners, people on social media, friends, family, really anybody who wants to submit some ghost stories for me to share in a new segment later on in the podcast. Heads up that because of this, the episodes might run a little longer than usual with this new segment. One of the stories that I'm saving for super close to Halloween is long and it is terrifying. But let's get into the episode first. Quick note that, and I apologize for not having this in my podcast episodes earlier, if you haven't played Dragon Age Origins, then you'll be lost in this one. And if you haven't played it yet, but you want to, this episode is chock full of spoilers. And I mean, surprise, surprise, we're talking Dragon Age again, but this time we're going back to the start with, as I mentioned, Dragon Age Origins. I have so much love for this game. I mean, I like the combat, I like the interface, I like the graphics much better at Inquisition, obviously, but Origins is just some kind of special. I got into Dragon Age when all 3 games were released, just like Mass Effect and The Witcher, so I had the luxury of being able to choose to begin each trilogy at the beginning, and coming from Mass Effect to Dragon Age was a bit of a learning curve, not gonna lie. Also, I'm a total noob, and I play on PC, so there was lots to learn, okay? Naturally, I ignored the, if you are new to combat, don't play as a mage, and played as a, you guessed it, a mage, on my first playthrough, which might have been why there was a steep learning curve. I've spoken at length about my need for control, especially in my Sims episode and my last episode about horror films, and I think that this also extends to why I am pulled more towards ranged weapons and magic in video games. Playing as a mage especially means that you can really control the battlefield. Dragon Age differs from Mass Effect and other role-playing or first-person shooter games, and that you can also control your other party members. So playing as a rogue with ranged weapons and a mage means that you can move to the edge of the battlefield, survey it, flank if you want to, set up combos, and still fight. And this is where tactics comes into play. Now, I've said before that I typically play casual or easy in most games, except for Insanity on Mass Effect 3, what? So I don't usually pay much attention to tactics, but that's what I loved about Dragon Age Origins. Using tactics is so easy, and it makes so much sense. Setting tactics and implementing them was so intuitive and easy to understand. And before I found the wonder, that is tactics, I used to get so pissed off at my party members because I, as a major archer, would move towards the edge of the battle to begin to survey and set up attacks and combos and everything like I mentioned, and frankly, not die immediately. And then my party members would disengage with the enemy and follow me, bringing the enemy to me. And I was so upset. I remember Liliana kept doing it on this one playthrough of Dragon Age Origins, and I think I screamed, "Liliana, what the fuck?" at my computer more times than I would like to admit. But eventually I caught on, and honestly, sometimes I still have this moment. And then, of course, after these moments of intense frustration and screaming, "Liliana, what the fuck?" at my computer, I it goes off in my head and I'm like, oh yeah, tactics. And also, out of this frustration, I actively sought out tips to help me out when it came to certain enemies. The werewolves. Anyone. You know what I'm talking about. And the biggest tip that has saved my ass more than most? Prioritize. The tactics in Origins work in a sequential way, so the most important tactics should always come first. And regardless if I'm using tactic presets, I always ensure that the very first tactic for every party member is to utilize a health poultice when their health drops past 50%. I found that it's better to be safe than sorry. Also, for mages, I put a tactic to use a lyrium potion when their mana drops past a certain point, and for rogues and warriors, I do the same but with a deep mushroom. Plus, combat-triggered buffs like frost weapons or the like are set up to automatically start when combat does. And a lot of that is through the presets, but I found that I actually like making kind of my own presets. After this, I prioritize per class. For example, Leliana is a rogue, so if the enemy is surrounding her, she'll throw an acid flask or a bomb. Same thing with a mage. If they're surrounded, they use Mind Blast to stun, and then they get the hell out of there. For my tank, I usually use any stunning effect when surrounded, like Warcry, and then have them attack. One thing that Inquisition does better when it comes to combat, and keep in mind that this is for my own selfish reasons, is adding guard to warriors primarily. And I do want to put a quick note in here. If you haven't figured out how to give guard to mages or rogues, you are missing out. Make sure that when you get to Skyhold and you are setting up materials and you are making mastercrafts, that you look for the materials that will grant you guard, regardless if it's a mage outfit, a rogue outfit, or a warrior outfit. It has saved my ass when I come out of playing casual mode. And guard just makes a warrior that much more of a tank. But something that Origins does better is allowing party members to switch between ranged and melee weapons, especially as a rogue. And I feel like this is more apparent to people like me who play almost exclusively as a rogue and enjoy this flexibility in Origins, though, not gonna lie, range combat as a rogue is much more difficult in Origins than Inquisition. And I think probably because the character itself is more flexible with the jumping and dodging and whatnot in Inquisition, but I really feel as though BioWare really wanted you to be a backstabbing melee-er in Origins. Most of the rogue talents are based on melee weapons and backstabbing, which isn't really conducive to being an archer. And I don't even want to talk about the fucking crossbows. If you have honestly been able to make crossbows work in Origins, please let me know your secrets, please. Because I love them, I think they're so cool, but I cannot make the fucking crossbows work as a rogue in Origins. But overall, the tactics and weapons flexibility in Origins definitely takes the cake. I really hope for Dragon Age 4 that we have the ability to switch between ranged and melee weapons, especially as a rogue. And you know how in Dragon Age 2, when you're a mage, you can use your staff as a weapon? Where was that in Origins and Inquisition? That's awesome. I want that back. Anyway, I think I always have a soft spot for the first game in a series, especially the way that I hit a trilogy, because it's almost like a first love when it comes to the series. I mean, you might move on from your first love or find something that suits you better, but there's always a special place in your heart for this love. This is likely a little overdramatic, which is true to form, but it's the best analogy I can come up with. But that's what makes us geeks though, right? I mean, we have this passion, we have this love for these games and movies and shows and everything else that we geek out about. And BioWare is great at pulling on these heartstrings. I think we can all agree on that. I think it's a huge part of what makes Origins such a great game. The character development is amazing, and it knocks it out of the park as a foundational game. This is where the story begins, and we get swept into the story immediately. And I don't think I've ever felt such an attachment to a character before. I mean, except maybe Shepard in Mass Effect. But that was an attachment that was built over 3 games. The attachment to the Warden is over 1 game, and regardless of the origin, I mean, your Warden could be an elf, a human, a dwarf, and we love them all the same. And I have such a fondness for my Warden, regardless of their race or class, and I don't know, I can't explain it. It's much more than I ever felt connected to Hawk from the 2nd game, or even my Inquisitor. And I think a big part of it is the fact that I felt like the Warden story was still left open, and was just continually teased and ripped open by BioWare throughout the entire series. Plus, I'm pretty sure that there was an ending card that said that Ferelden had not heard the last of the Warden, however, and you're like, yeah, I get to do more. And yeah, you get to do more of the add-on games and the DLCs and stuff, but I want more of my Warden in these next games, you know? And I think it's just because it's just snippets of their life, and it just doesn't feel like it's quite enough. And I mean, I wonder if this is because I just didn't feel that connection to Hawke, as I mentioned, but Hawke's journey just felt finished. Even after Dragon Age 2 and of course Inquisition, no matter which fate you choose for them, it just felt, well, for me, Hawke was a she, but Hawke's journey just felt finished. And the Inquisitor's fate too, even after the Trespasser DLC. But the Warden's never felt finished. And obviously this applies if your Warden is still alive after the events of Origins. Though even if your Warden made the ultimate sacrifice, their legacy still has that effect. Especially in Inquisition, when you return to Ferelden, it kind of feels like your game is haunted by such a legacy. Like I said, I'm overdramatic, but I guess it kind of taps into that whole first love kind of thing, especially because the game itself was so brilliantly done, and the other characters and their relationships with the Warden were brilliantly done as well. I would say perfectly, though there are some things that I would change about some of the dialogue between characters, the party, and NPCs. Of course. As I said, I started my very first playthrough as a mage, which was a ton of fun. It was hard, but it was a ton of fun. Usually on my first playthroughs, though, I typically tend to miss things. I don't know what it is about first playthroughs. It's like, okay, I want to get this done, and then, you know, you're still kind of going into it, and you're still kind of green. You just don't know all the secrets quite yet. One thing I definitely missed on my first playthrough was the Cullen dialogue, where you can actually make him run away from you. Keep in mind that I believe this is only as a female character you can do this, but basically you can just embarrass him enough for him to just sputter out a bunch of awkwardness, and then he runs. He just runs. He books it. And now that I'm thinking about it, I can't believe I'm about to compare Cullen to Paul, but does anybody watch 90 Day Fiancé? And you know, Paul and Karini, and anytime he's in a situation he doesn't want to be in, he just runs. And then there was like, Paul is running to the woods. That's what it reminds me of. And I just realized that. And it pains me to say it, but it's so funny. And that's exactly what it reminds me of. And of course, you can follow Cullen until he disappears into a doorway. It's amazing. And I laugh out loud every time it happens. So if you haven't done this and you're playing as a female mage character, please try it just to get a good giggle, and you will laugh so hard, especially if you've seen 90 Day Fiancé and you know exactly what I'm talking about. Anyway, oh man, okay, that was good. We needed a good laugh there. So before I dive into the origin that I have the most to pick a bone about, I do want to cover a couple of things that would be cool, just as an overall thing. I don't think that they're totally necessary, because part of the fun is joining the fandom and looking up lore and discovering these types of info snippets after you played the game and become, frankly, obsessed with it. But it took me an absurdly long time to realize that all of the origins, regardless of the one you choose, play out. So if you choose to be a human mage, for example, however, is still rated by Hal, the Dalish elf dies from the blight, because Duncan only appears in the origin that you've picked and isn't there to save everyone else. And I love that they've done that they've included that. Also, I did not clue into the fact that if you play as a human mage, you're actually related to Hawke from Dragon Age 2. As we know from Dragon Age 2, Hawke's mother's maiden name is Amel, which is the same last name as the human mage. And then there's a part in Dragon Age 2 where it reads out the history of the Amel family, and there's mention of the human mage's mother, Revka, having a mage child, which is, if you've picked the human mage origin in Origins, the hero of Ferelden. I did not clue in on this for the longest time. Even after playing a human mage and going through Dragon Age 2, I just did not get it. And honestly, admitting these things kind of makes me feel like a dunce, but I'll get over it eventually. Okay, so let's stop for a hot minute before I get into too much of a rant and get into our very first ghost story. Thank you so much to everyone who submitted their stories. I am so pumped for this segment. I love ghost stories. And this particular storyteller has asked to remain anonymous, but has allowed the use of personal she, her pronouns to describe herself. I've lived in an old house since I was born. My mother and father bought this house a year before I came into the world, and died in this house just a few years before I turned 18. Naturally, I inherited the house, and everything, and everyone within it. I wish I could say that I knew it was my parents haunting me, but it had started even before they died. And afterwards, it was like my protectors were gone, and the activity only got worse. The shitty thing is, I can't leave here. Everything I have is this house. My parents didn't leave any money, and any realtor I've spoken to tells me it would be a hard sell. The state I live in requires realtors to inform potential buyers of any deaths on the property, and there have been a few. My parents must not have cared that much, since I guess they wanted to flip the house originally and fell in love with its beauty. It is beautiful, it's just really fucking haunted. Before my parents died, it was the typical haunting. Doors opening and closing on their own, footsteps when no one was around, dishes being thrown across the room when nobody was in it, the usual horror movie special. But after they died, things have really taken a turn. When my parents bought the house, they were told that the old piano that had resided in the living room since forever came with the house. This thing is ancient. It's probably worth its weight in gold, literally, but my parents never really paid it much attention. It was kind of neglected and has never been tuned. A week after my parents passed, I was upstairs in the house organizing their bedroom, crying my eyes out as I did it. All of a sudden, I heard music coming from downstairs, so I went to investigate, thinking that I'd maybe left the Alexa on or something. But as soon as I reached the top of the stairs, I could tell it was not Alexa. The most beautiful, haunting piano music was floating through the house. I wish I knew enough about music to put a name to the tune, but it was jarring. It was so elegantly played, and I just stood there in absolute shock as the out-of-tune piano inexplicably played something so beautiful. I don't know how long I stood there, but when I finally came out of this trance I was in, I began to walk down the stairs, and as soon as the piano came into view, the cover slammed over the keys and the music stopped abruptly. What came next was this force of energy that seemed to shockwave throughout the house. It hit me straight in the chest and winded me so badly I threw up. Then this jeering laughter filled the air, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw something run from the living room into the kitchen. It took me about a week or two to sleep there after that. I had a priest come in and bless the house, and things seemed to die down, but about a year after the piano incident, so just this past week, something else happened. I had this nightmare where I sat up in bed to get ready for the day just as I did every day, but when I looked around, the walls were dripping with blood. There was blood everywhere, and I turned to look to the doorway, and there was this opaque black figure standing there. In a wispy voice, it asked me, "Well, aren't you going to clean this all up?" I woke up sweating and looked to the doorway immediately and saw that black figure standing there, but he wasn't alone. My room was filled with black figures, and as I blinked, they did too, but with yellow eyes. I screamed at them to leave me alone, but they didn't. They seemed to close in on me until they formed a black wall around my bed. I felt so helpless and like I was going to die. I felt like an animal on display at a zoo, and I can't tell you how long I sat in bed, the covers pulled tightly around my neck, staring and blinking at these things, staring and blinking back at me. After however long it was, they all just disappeared, and my room sunk back into the gray darkness it usually is. I don't know what this means. I can't sleep here anymore. I'm afraid that one day I'll become one of these black figures, just staring with blinking, yellow eyes. Ooh, okay. Even just reading that, and I did turn on the dramatics a little bit for that, I have shivers up and down my spine. So whoever you are, if this is more than just a story, please, please, please stay safe. Get as much help as you can. It sounds like you're on the right track. Okay. Whew. Now that we're good and creeped out, let's lighten the mood with a little more ranting and dramatics, as per usual. So there is one origin that I play consistently. It's kind of like my guilty pleasure, and I can't tell you why. Oh, okay, no, actually I can. It's the female human noble origin, and I play it because I want to be queen. Even though sometimes I don't become queen, but most of the time I do. I mean, why the fuck not, right? I think I also like it so much because there is more, well, there feels like there's more resolution at the end of it than most of the other origins. I mean, you get to kill Arl Howe, the man who killed your parents. And I don't know about you guys, but I actually cried when I had to leave Bryce and Eleanor Kuzlin to die during the epilogue, so getting to kill Howe each time is always sweet. And, again, because I'm dramatic, I always make sure that my character, that Kuzlin, has enough strength points to wield the Kuzlin family sword that you get during the epilogue before I make it to kill Arl Howe, because it just feels right to kill him with the Kuzlin sword. Anyways, back to the beginning. I felt like Kuzlin should have been able to have more meaningful dialogue with King Kaelin at Ostagar, especially given the severity and connotations of Arl Howe's crime. Of course, Kaelin has lots going on, given the war with the Darkspawn, but the fact that he doesn't recognize her and has to clarify that she is the youngest Kuzlin is kind of weird. And I say she because, again, I always play as a female human noble, but same thing for a male human noble. Why doesn't Kaelin recognize them? And to my point, there are, well, at this point were, only 2 Terrans in all of Ferelden and Bryce and Loghain. So wouldn't it be a safe assumption that since the Terrans are second only to royalty, that Kaelin and the young Kuzlin would be at least familiar with one another? I mean, especially as a female, wouldn't it be pertinent to say that maybe she was the second in line for Kaelin if anything happened to Enora? Kaelin and Enora aren't that much older than Kuzlin, so why isn't there much more familiarity? I mean, obviously I understand that the writers can only do so much, but I'm a demanding fan. And it would have been great to have more recognition, even with Loghain as well. And I mean, Sir Jory, who's one of the other Warden recruits, is from High Ever, and he doesn't even recognize her. I would just assume that the caliber of noble of the Kuzlin family would be akin to celebrities, especially in the town, the area where they rule. So why wouldn't Kuzlin be more widely recognized, especially as the last unmarried Terran's daughter or son? One other idea that I had was when you're out doing your pre-joining ritual in the wilds, nothing is mentioned about Kuzlin's brother Fergus being out scouting, and we know that he is because Kaelin has said that Fergus is out scouting, and Duncan, I think, even mentions it as well. And if Kuzlin had a dialogue option like, keep an eye out for my brother, that would just tie it all together nicely. I feel like there were like these little additions that could have been made that just, I don't know, would feel like it just was more complete, if that makes sense. And I have had this discussion with several other geeky Dragon Age fans, hello Facebook groups, always comes back to a discussion around having the main character using either dialogue selections like you do in Origins versus having a voiced main character like you do in number 2 and Inquisition. It always seems in these discussions that there are die-hard fans of non-voiced, and then there are die-hard fans of voiced, and then there are people like me that are honestly okay with either or. I tend to lean more towards voiced just because I find it to be more immersive. But at the same time, if the hero of Ferelden was voiced, then the dialogue could be a bit more flexible. But if the character wasn't voiced, like they are, then the written options could really be whatever, right? And that's the discussion, and that's, I think, where the argument stems from, is it more immersive and flexible to have the main protagonist voiced or not? I mean, I get both sides, I really do. Okay, well, while you're thinking about that, let's dive into some good news. This is only good news on the Geek Soup podcast. In Texas, a 14-year-old girl has discovered a molecule that can selectively bind to the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2, meaning that this breakthrough could potentially lead to a cure for COVID-19. Now, I am as sick and tired of hearing COVID-19 everywhere, just like everyone else, but the pandemic isn't over just because you're over it. And excuse me for my awful singing there. I'm really embarrassed about that. It was my pathetic attempt at trying to copy the sound on TikTok. And if you guys have TikTok, you'll know what I mean. If you don't, you're just going to think I'm super weird, which, join the club. Anyway, Breakthroughs like this girl's, and her name is Anika Shibrolu, could help. And the fact that this was an 8th grader is even more encouraging. We have amazing kids out there. Congratulations, Anika. This is some seriously good news. Okay, I love that. Yes, so the pandemic isn't over just because you're over it. And in an awful segue into continuing this episode, one thing I am not over is some other things with Kuzland origin. Another thing that I would have loved to have had with Kuzland, and this is unabashedly because I just love having her become queen, is that the option to have Kuzland become queen should have been more obvious, especially with a Kuzland in a romance with Alistair. I feel like R.L. Eamon or Ban Tegan or somebody should have suggested it. Though I can understand that having 2 Grey Wardens at the throne could look like a total power grab, especially given the history of the Grey Wardens in Ferelden. But the fact that a Kuzlan is, at least as far as we know at the time, the Tierna of Highever should negate her being a Grey Warden, should it not? I mean, the family motto is a Kuzland always does their duty. And I can imagine that Bryce and Eleanor Kuzland were very highly regarded at court. Plus the scandal of Arl Howe being Logain's right-hand man, and after what he did to Highever, that should give them quite the leg to stand on, right? And Eamon, a smart man and champion for Alistair, should have clued into that. On the other hand, being told that you definitely could not be queen as an elf or mage, although yes, I now know it's obvious, should have been apparent too. It would have saved my poor character from announcing she'd rule beside Alistair and embarrassing herself in front of the Landsmeet. The Landsmeet, people. Oh, God. So embarrassing. I just feel like it should have been more obvious. And it kind of would have set up for some cool dialogue between, or like some cheesy dialogue between Alistair and Kuzlan being like, should I really become queen? Do you really want to be queen with me? Do you really want to rule beside me? And all this stuff. And I live for cheese. And I know that, if you're like me, you probably also live for cheese. And please, as I keep saying cheese, I really hope that you get this reference. So yes, if you live for cheese and to be queen, let's talk some royal-ass mods for PC. On Nexus Mods, search for Dahlia Lynn, DAHLIALYNN, that's the username, and download these mods. Okay, she has a royal wedding mod. It's a cheese fest, but it's the best cheese fest. It warms my cold little heart, and you get to watch your warden marry Alistair. Remember, this is only for Kuzlans. Alistair's nightmare is heartbreaking, and that is regardless of origin. It's specific to Alistair. It's heartbreaking, and well, we play BioWare games to have our hearts broken, right? So download it. And then if you want a little cheesy lovin', and this is, again, regardless of origin, download Alistair's first night love scene and prepare yourself. And then also her mod, Sleep Till Dawn, is fantastic. And I don't know, it really, kudos to all of these mod creators. I don't know how you do it. I could never do it. But it makes it so much more immersive. And regardless of game, I am so grateful for it. So thank you. There are other mods for those who like to play as Kuzland especially. And those are Of Noble Cast by Jog, Jog. This makes it so that you aren't dressed in battle dress when you first meet Duncan and Arl Howe. You're dressed like a noble lady. Sir Gilmore Reimagined by Vanilla Sina. Hello, handsome. And then Farewell, Sir Gilmore by Kajana, Kajana. You get to give him a proper goodbye. I won't spoil it. It's awesome. And then also Kuzland Armor and Weapons by Shadow5973. You get an armor set in Highever colors, and it also is in a trunk in your bedroom before you start fighting those people, so you aren't just naked and punching. Also, download ZDF Dialogue Fix by E. Joslin, EJOSLIN. It has a bunch of little dialogue fixes throughout the game that just make so much more sense, including where Fergus refers to you as queen and I die of happiness every time. And it's actually voiced by the original voice actors, so it's really great. I think it's just like lost dialogue, basically, or cut dialogue, something like that. And then also, for those who like to romance Alistair and put him through the dark ritual with Morgan, which nobody likes to do, the mod Alistair's Dark Ritual by Kajana, again, Kajana, will be a special treat. I'm not going to spoil it. You gotta check it out. And I think we'll end this part here. It's already gone on way longer than I expected it to. Keep an eye out for part 2 coming soon. Yes, there is a part 2 to this ranting. I am still accepting ghost stories, so if you'd like your ghost story to be featured on an episode, please submit it via my social media. I will have all of the tags at the end. Honestly, I love ghost stories so much that I might make this a regular segment. All right, well, let's end this episode then with another great segment. What I gave a fuck about today. I have a lot of love for Australia. Some of the best people I know are Australian, and their animals are just amazing. While most of them can kill you, there is one fuzzy animal that I just adore, and I think everybody adores, is the koala. Well, for me, I think it's because of all those word association games that we used to do in like elementary school. Remember those? You'd be assigned an animal that's name started with the first letter of yours kind of thing. And I was almost exclusively Australian animals. I was Kate the kangaroo, Kate the kookaburra, and more often than not, Kate the koala. So I learned a lot about koalas, except today I learned something that I didn't know about them. And that is that the fingerprints of the koala are almost so indistinguishable from humans that they often become confused at crime scenes. What are koalas doing at crime scenes? I don't know. I mean, it is Australia, I guess, right? And even though these little fuzzies could confuse us at crime scenes, they should be protected at all costs. The losses of the koala population from the 2019 and 2020 bushfires are estimated between 29 and 67%. And now conservation groups need all the help they can get. And you can still donate to help Australian wildlife via the World Wildlife Foundation or the Australian government's website. And helping wildlife will always be something I give a fuck about. Until next time, stay frosty.
Thanks for tuning in today, geeks. Be sure to join us on Patreon at www.patreon.com/geeksoup. You can also check out our website at www.thegeeksoup.com or check us out on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Geek Soup Pod. I'm also on YouTube, and stay tuned for Geek Soup Gaming only on Twitch.